Hey everyone, welcome to the Healthcare Provider Happy Hour. I'm your host, Jennifer George, and I'm joining you this evening with a special guest. Her name is Shoni Duesling, and she's a certified life coach and a cognitive behavioral therapy practitioner who is on a mission to empowering women to help them break free of perfectionistic mindset and tendencies. So, if you are someone who is struggling with perfectionism, like many of us are in healthcare, you don't want to miss this episode. So, grab your drink of choice and join us. Welcome to the Healthcare Provider Happy Hour. This is a safe space where we invite healthcare providers to unapologetically be themselves after the working day. My name is Jennifer George, and each week I will connect you with guests and stories that will help transform your stress to success and fulfillment. Are you with me? Grab your drink of choice and let's chat. Hey Shoni, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. Thanks for joining me. I know
Thanks
it's
so much for having me.
oh, I'm so excited to have you here. I've been following you on Instagram for a while, and I see your content on perfectionism. So I'm really excited for you to share some insight with our listeners, our healthcare providers out there who might be struggling right now. But tell
Mhm.
me first what you're drinking.
Well, okay, so normally it's 9:30 in the morning here in Singapore. So
Yeah.
normally I would be having water, but today I used my soda stream and made fizzy water
Nice.
for this occasion.
Some carbonation. I actually have water too, and I often do drink water, but especially because here it's 8:30 p.m. at night. But I'm sensitive to caffeine, so if I have like a tea or a coffee right now, I'll be up. So so I'm sticking with water too, but not carbonated. So I know a little bit about you, but can you tell our listeners more about you and how you evolved to this place right now?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from Ontario, so small town Ontario. And I, yeah, I grew up there with two younger sisters. And I would say the three things that I love the most probably would be nature, people, and learning. So, nature, of course, from growing up in a small town and just Ontario, Canada in general, you're surrounded by nature. So, I really enjoy that and sports and things like that. And then connecting with people, I always invited all of our neighbor friends over, and now that has translated into me inviting people over for dinner all the time and things like that. So, and then learning is the last thing. So, I love to learn, and that actually led me to Singapore because when I was taking my master's in Vancouver, I met my husband who's Singaporean. So,
Nice.
thankful for that.
Love,
And
love brought you there too.
exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
very cool. What part of Ontario are you from? Because I'm in Ontario.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Waterford. It's a very small town of about 3,000, and it's close to Lake Erie. So it's close to Port Dover, Brantford, Hamilton,
Okay.
getting a
Yeah,
little bit bigger.
yeah. So I'm in Windsor, so you're about 3.5 hours ish probably away from me, or
Yep,
we're living there. But
exactly.
very cool though that you're in Singapore, and it's very cool I think to connect with people through this medium all over the world. And it just goes to show, like, and we'll get into everything in a moment, but it just goes to show how connected people are regardless of where you live or where you once lived, or because we're more alike that way, and in other ways other than our location demographically, right? So this was really
Exactly.
cool. I'm so happy to have you here. So one of the reasons why I did follow you and have been following you on Instagram is because of your content on perfectionism and how
Mhm.
you have a mission to help women break free of it. So can
Mhm.
you tell me like what inspired that journey for you?
Yeah, so perfectionism is something that I've definitely wrestled with my entire life and until recently. And it's caused me a lot of anxiety. So I also do have clinical anxiety. So the two of those are just a terrible mix. And so I so I decided that I wanted to go into coaching. I used to be in marketing, but I wanted to make that switch because I wanted to help people more. And as I was trying to figure out what my niche was, I realized that it's always better to work on something that you yourself have struggled with so that you can help people from that place. So that is why I chose perfectionism. And it's been amazing because the more that I learn about myself and the more that I work with clients, it's just been this very organic learning process of recognizing more and more what the different issues are with perfectionism, and at the same time learning more and more ways of addressing those. So it's, yeah, I've really been grateful for the journey so far.
That's great. I'm going to backtrack you a little. Just to, can you let me know in plain terms what perfectionism actually is?
Totally. Yes. I
Yeah.
think that's a great question. So oftentimes people think that, maybe not often, but I think it's becoming less and less the case. But for a long time, perfectionism was looked at as a very positive thing. And there seems to be this conflation between perfectionism and high achieving. So people kind of see perfectionism as this great personality trait where you strive and you achieve great things, but actually that would be defined as high achieving. And the difference is that perfectionism, at the very basic term, is shooting for an impossible standard. That's how I would define it. And because you're shooting for an impossible standard, you're never reaching it. And a lot of perfectionists, their desire to achieve perfection is from this desire to prove their worth. So it's not actually from a desire to want to achieve great things. They achieve great things because they feel that that will make them feel like a legitimate, like they have value.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah,
And even when they do achieve those things, they're still not they're still not feeling valuable, or they're still feeling anxiety or whatever it might be at the time. Like the negative feelings are still there. Does
totally.
that make sense? Okay. I just wanted to be clear, but what you said there, because when you said an impossible standard, I thought that was interesting how you worded it as impossible. I guess that would be dependent on who it is you're talking to, right? But it's almost like setting yourself up to fail in a way. It sounds
Yes,
from what you're
it
saying.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because usually what will happen is once you don't hit that standard, or let's say that you do hit your standard, you'll find a reason why your standard, why that result still wasn't good enough. And
Okay.
then you'll start the cycle again, of just trying to achieve and then not achieving, or finding an error with what you achieved and therefore feeling like you need to try better next time. And it just continues
Yeah.
over and over.
Okay, I see. So how would, so that makes sense, like even in the healthcare setting. So how could perfectionism then, setting yourself up that way, how could it lead to burnout? How could that cycle, that vicious cycle lead to someone's burnout?
I think, yeah, I think it definitely can lead to burnout because of the amounts of energy that are spent. I think, uh, yeah, I think there are three things. So we spend a lot of energy trying to achieve perfection.
Mhm.
We also spend a lot of time trying to achieve perfection, which means that oftentimes it takes the form of people spending a lot of unnecessary time on very small details instead of on the more important, seeing the bigger picture. And then the third part would be there's a lot of emotional damage that we do to ourselves by beating ourselves up when we make a mistake or fail. So you combine these three things and you're for sure going to eventually burn out, because your emotional tank is low, your physical energy is low, and psychologically you're just not in a good place. So they definitely can add together to create that.
I can totally see that happening, especially the energy expenditure, kind of like that overinvestment in something that's not paying you back in return in the way in which you anticipated or were expecting. And also, one of the things I talk about on this podcast that I've talked about is the bigger picture too, is, getting lost in the small details and those things we don't, that are, I don't want to say small in the sense that I'm devaluing what somebody perceives it to be, but small in the sense that you don't have the control over certain things and you can't let those things go, right? And just like I said, not seeing the bigger picture. Like, I often find that does take a lot of energy away from you when you get lost in the details of
Yes.
something, right? Or you just perseverate on something that, again, you have no control over, rather than
Yep.
seeing how that impacts the greater picture of your life or your practice in some way, shape, or form. Very interesting. So how can,
Yeah, totally.
in terms of self-care, like then, because one of the things I talk about in terms of burnout prevention is self-care. I'm not sure if I'm using the right language as it pertains to perfectionism by saying that, but
Yeah.
what are some things then, or some steps that people can take for themselves without worrying about that in itself going perfectly
Yeah.
in order to overcome perfectionism? If that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. So maybe I'll talk about a strategy people can use and then how to not worry about it being perfect. So,
Okay.
kind of two separate things. So, the first part, the strategy, would be self compassion. And this is a word that's thrown around all the time, but it's actually, and I'm sure you know this as well, it's a legitimate framework for working through different scenarios in your life. And there's some amazing free resources online if anyone just Googles self-compassion resources. So, but yeah, so that's something that I teach my clients at the very beginning of the program, because usually, um, yeah, oftentimes we're not kind to ourselves. And I mean, I guess I kind of like to think about it in terms of an external friend. So imagine you could choose between spending a week with a friend who just constantly criticizes you versus a week with a friend who constantly encourages you. Like, which one would we choose? Right?
I would
So,
hope we would choose the more encouraging one. Oh, but our emotions get the best of us sometimes, or a lack of self-compassion. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So oftentimes we spend more time with ourselves than anyone else. So I think that's why I really encourage people to cultivate this sense of kindness and being a friend towards themselves, because it's just so powerful. It sounds like such a simple concept, but it's so powerful. And how you can do this is just starting to monitor your thoughts and just recognize, when am I being critical, and how can I replace that criticism with kindness. It's as simple as that, but it's so powerful. And I think the way that we can not worry about that process being perfect is to just kind of have grace with ourselves in the process. So to say, you know what, you're trying, or I'm trying, however you want to talk to yourself.
Mm.
But and say, maybe I'm not there yet. Maybe these thoughts, especially if you've been critical to yourself for your whole life, maybe these things that I'm trying to say to myself, I don't even believe them coming from me, because I've never heard them come from me before. But you know what? I'm just going to keep going. I'm doing the best that I can. And yeah, just kind of nurturing that self-kind, self-compassionate voice within yourself.
Okay, so that's the first like that's the strategy part around it, is starting with self-compassion.
Yeah.
Now, do you
Yeah.
recommend doing this just kind of like when people are experiencing negative thoughts towards themselves, or like almost preventatively in a way, like being more self-compassionate without reacting to a negative feeling internally, right? Or a negative emotion. Like could we just like maybe do some self-talk, or on the front end of things,
Yep.
right, without it being so much of just a reaction. So I know for me personally, I'll do like stuff like this in the morning when I have like the most time to myself, when the world seems more peaceful, there's hope in a new day. Like I just
Yes.
like the more self-compassionate side of me comes out better at that time. So I let that I let that kind of roll in the mornings, and it's definitely harder um, to react to negative feelings throughout the day. But I do find I try to visualize in a sense as well as I'm doing that in the morning, just that positive self talk, whether it's affirmations, whether it's mirror talk for me. I did that this morning, for example.
Yeah.
Felt better after, even though it was a bit awkward. I still make myself do it. Yeah, so I guess, is there a space for that to do even preventatively as well, just kind of without reacting to a negative emotion?
Yeah. So I think that I think there's definitely benefit to just cultivating it as a practice in general instead of it just being reactive, because then we're more resilient when the time comes.
Yeah.
I think something that I would almost say, because sometimes it's difficult to imagine or to say like you can do this. Actually, things like that are helpful, but something else that's really helpful is to cultivate a sense of gratitude,
Mhm.
because that builds this sort of buffer so that when those situations do come, you've been practicing being grateful for things. So you can also couch self-compassion in things like that. And sometimes that makes it a bit more tangible to say something like, I am grateful. You can even say, I am grateful for how I responded to this situation yesterday, or I am grateful for this new opportunity to connect with this person today. And just constantly looking for what you're grateful for. Because I mean, I'm sure you're in healthcare, so you probably understand this a lot better than me, but
Yeah.
it actually changes the makeup of our brain when we're thankful for things. So I think coupling those two things together um, is really helpful, and just being kind to yourself throughout the day. So just in the little things as well. So it doesn't need to be this huge situation and then you make a mistake and then you try to be compassionate, but it can be in the very small things.
Mhm.
So for example, you can just say, as you're going about your day, like, oh, I just made a pretty good breakfast. I'm pretty proud of myself. Like, it can be very small things that normally you would think. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but the more that you do things like that, the more that you're cultivating this just kind voice towards yourself. And eventually, you don't even realize that you're doing it. That self critical voice will get less and less to the point that it's hardly even there.
Nice. The cooking piece really relates to me, actually, because I'm very
Yeah.
insecure about cooking, and it's not something I really enjoy that much, to be honest, but it's something I need to do. So when I do cook something, I am pretty proud of myself. But I never thought about like applauding myself or recognizing myself for that. But I'm going to start doing that, because maybe that'll just help me get over the critical part of myself when it comes to my cooking, right? For sure.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about gratitude, because honestly, I feel like on my podcast lately, I've been doing nothing but talking about gratitude. but it really, but it really is like, so in some ways, I feel like I don't talk about it enough, because it really is a huge staple in my life.
Yeah.
And I definitely do it in the mornings, and I'm now doing it more later in the day too. like you
Okay.
said, in the sense that kind of related to what you said, in the smaller things, like just
Mm.
being grateful for those little things throughout the day that we normally don't even appreciate, right? And
Yeah.
just taking an extra moment to appreciate those, because I just feel like you can't attract or bring into your life what it is that you really desire if you can't be thankful for
Mm.
what is right now, right? Or come from that place of gratitude. So I'm so glad that's part of your strategy and recommendation, because that totally aligns with me.
Yeah, totally.
Can we talk a little bit about self-sabotaging? Because I'm kind of bad for this in the sense of procrastination for me personally. Uh,
Hmm.
how can we, like, why do we self-sabotage ourselves as it relates to trying to let go of perfectionism? For me, I know that's something I do. I almost do it like when things are going really well. I
Hmm.
almost just end up self-sabotaging myself. It's so weird.
So,
But yeah, maybe you can chat more about that.
yeah, so would that be with regards to procrastination in particular?
For me, it is. It's usually procrastination. That's a self-sabotaging practice for me.
Yeah, so interesting. Um, I actually just did a podcast episode on procrastination a couple weeks ago, so I'm glad that you're asking about that.
I'll have to check
Um,
that out.
yeah, so the reason that we procrastinate is because we don't understand the emotions behind it. So oftentimes we think that we're procrastinating to put off a task, but what we're actually doing is we're putting off the emotions that come with that task. So
Okay.
for instance, if there's a new project, especially if it's something new that we've never done before, there might be anxiety, there might be fear of feeling overwhelmed or things like this. And so instead of diving in and experiencing those unhelpful or those uncomfortable emotions, we self-sabotage by basically just saying, you know what, maybe I need to organize my whole room right now, or maybe I need to answer all of my emails suddenly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and just do all of these small things that are quite mindless and that don't make us experience those emotions.
Right.
But the amazing thing is that the more that we practice, I mean, the first thing is recognizing what those emotions are. So honestly, that in itself is extremely powerful, because then you recognize, oh, you know what you know what you're trying to avoid, so it kind of takes the power away from the excuse.
Okay.
And
That makes sense.
yeah, and then after you kind of deflate the desire to procrastinate, then once you step in and repeatedly just push past that procrastination, you get that reward, that rewarding feeling of how great it feels to have pushed past this wall that you never thought there was a world beyond that wall. But the more that you do it, the more that you come to be comfortable with pushing past that.
Okay, so now I have to ask a question, because one of the things about burnout is energy depletion,
Yeah.
for most people. So now my question to you is, if you continue to put, like, how do you know the difference? I don't know if you can answer this, but how do you know the difference then between respecting your boundary of needing rest,
Mm.
um, or whether you should deflate that procrastination or that self-sabotaging behavior and just go at it?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
kind of chat about that for a moment?
Yeah. So off the top of my head, I suppose I would ask the question of what is behind the procrastination.
Okay.
Um, is it actually a need for rest? Or am I using the need for rest as an excuse? And oftentimes, I mean, we're in a society where all of us need more rest,
Hmm.
anyways. But I think that I think we can trust ourselves to know the difference. I think that oftentimes we get in this place where we are asking, which which one is it? Is like, am I just tired, or am I procrastinating because I don't want to jump into something? And I think deep down we can tap into what the real reason is, and then from there, once we have that insight, then we can move forward with the appropriate strategy.
Yeah. So it really comes down to self-awareness through this process,
Yeah,
right? Like it's a big part of it or most of it.
a
Um,
huge part.
okay, very cool. And that's what I do. Like I know for me, like um, I can just decipher usually, like if I'm on the couch watching TV and I know I have something that I think I need to do, if I physically just can't see myself doing it, then I know
Mm,
I need rest and and I actually do end up feeling better the next day and more energized, but it really does come down to that awareness and
yeah,
asking yourself those uncomfortable questions, I think, without being
yeah,
without being afraid of that, right? Or fearful of that. Uh,
exactly.
yeah. So, when I think of perfectionism too, sometimes traditionally I've always thought of like overachieving, you know, super competitive, not necessarily with others, but even within ourselves to a fault, as healthcare providers, just because of the way we're conditioned throughout our schooling, right? We have to
Mm,
obtain certain grades to get into a program, and then you got to maintain that, and et cetera, et cetera. So
mhm,
how can we learn to be more self-compassionate and put less pressure on ourselves, to feel like as healthcare providers we have to know everything in order to help
mm,
people?
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose um, the first thing that we could say to ourselves is just a simple thing of, I'm only human. Knowing everything is not possible.
Perfect. Yeah.
And and then from there saying, what are the things that I actually need to learn for maybe this patient or for whatever is in front of you, and then learning those. And then from there, I would say to not be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, in I guess in the healthcare profession.
It can cost yeah, patients their health in some way, shape, or form. I mean,
Yes.
that's where that pressure comes from, right? Is we don't want to hurt anybody. That's like the number one law, like thou shalt do no harm, right? So, you
Yeah.
know, um, that in itself is just that. But you're right, we're human and we're not we're more alike to our patients than we are different is the way I see it from an empathetic
Yeah.
standpoint. So um, I think if you're transparent in your relational and everything, you know, patients are pretty understanding if you don't know everything or if you need time to figure things out rather than going in there and potentially harming, right? Or hurting.
Yeah.
So, but sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. But yeah,
No.
I know what you mean.
No.
It's not, yeah, sometimes mistakes can be seen as an all or none for us when it, when it comes to patient care directly. But even in our own policies and procedures of our own practices, right? And our own colleges and stuff, like just even upholding all of that can be pressuring on some of us. So, yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I guess maybe the answer there is to just be more gracious with yourself in acknowledging that you don't know everything and being okay to be a bit more transparent. So perhaps that could take the form of asking, and this is coming from me not being a healthcare professional, so you can you can say that's not realistic if possible. But one thing that comes to mind would be to even just ask the patients more questions and
Mhm.
not feel pressure, not feel pressure right off the bat to address the issue based on a very small amount of information. So not feeling like, oh, they only gave me 3 things. Okay, I need to think like, what is the solution? And I better have the perfect solution. But being open to saying, oh, you know what? Like, can you tell me more about this? And not having this fear of looking imperfect or looking like you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
because you're actually going to serve them better by doing that. And the other thing would be to be open to asking other people that you work with for help, which I think a lot of times we can be afraid to do that because it might make us look, we might feel that it will make us look less intelligent or whatever, but it's actually a huge opportunity to grow and learn. So we're only going to improve. So I think it's recognizing that growing and learning is only going to make you a better healthcare professional in the future.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. Like you don't have to have it all figured out in any moment, right? Like you're, like you said, being open to growing and learning. I had a situation today actually with a patient, and he was a bit irritated because he was fairly new, and when you're new, many different providers are coming in, right? And they're asking about your story and stuff like that. So I was one one of the few who came in at some point, and he said, I already answered this. It's got to be written somewhere or something. And I kind of said, like, I said it could be, it very well could be, but you're my most reliable uh, person, to give me this information. So empowering him to know that he's everything, right? Like his story matters, and not to look at a computer screen in order to figure this out. Like I felt like it needed to come from him. And so when I said that to him, I don't know if anyone had ever said that to him before, but he kind of like took a whole new stance and was a lot more forthcoming. But yeah, like not, I'm just glad that I didn't like freeze in that moment and be like, yeah, you're right. I should be like, I should have everything in front of me and I should know everything before I come see you. But that's not the reality. So, but that is kind of the way you're taught in some ways, right?
yeah.
Yeah, so, but I've been practicing for several years now, and I've had to, I've been practicing for 13 years, so I've gotten to learn these things over time. Nobody has it all figured out in the beginning, even though
Yeah.
we feel like we have to, but we don't. And I think it's important to know to embrace growth that way for sure. And no patient's the same, right? No person is the
Yeah.
same, and adapting our communication around that, I think, is super important, so that the patient always feels empowered.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love just the way that you did that, and I also love the idea of empowering the client and seeing them as the richest source of information. That's
absolutely.
oh
Yeah, yeah. His
amazing.
perspective is, to me, all that matters in the end, right? Because
Yeah.
all have our own perspectives, and trying to be mindful of that for sure. But you've been so
Amazing.
awesome, Shodi. I'd like to ask you one more question before we time out here. Um,
Sure.
so what, you kind of touched on this a moment ago, but what would be your advice for healthcare providers who are struggling then with feelings of A, having to know it all, or B, not knowing enough?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose it would just be actually one thing that they can do is to check their language with themselves. So one thing in particular would be just notice how often you are saying the word should to yourself, because oftentimes we use that word so frequently that it becomes just this normal narrative in our minds that I should know this, I should do that, I should have done this. And replacing that instead with the word could is extremely powerful. So that's something that they can do so they don't feel like I should know it all, but they're like, I could know it all. Okay, interesting. That reframes it a bit. And then from there, you can say, okay, well, it becomes an opportunity instead of a burden. And
Right.
then you can say, interesting, what would I like to learn more about, and how can I grow? And yeah, just really having that growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset, and recognizing that we're all on a journey, we're all trying to improve, but none of us are there yet. None of us will ever be fully there. So recognizing that common humanity with other people as well, and then being okay and kind of accepting themselves despite not being perfect.
Right. Yeah. And I actually consciously now try not to use the word perfect, although I mentioned it a moment ago to you. I know that I did in response to something you said, but I am really conscious now of not even using the word because I feel like it holds a standard that doesn't really exist. Uh,
Yeah.
and like you said, it's an impossible standard that we kind of have loosely used in society, but can really affect people's mental health and energy levels and all of that, right? And their lack of compassion with themselves as a result. So,
Exactly.
yeah, well, that's amazing. And I like the part you said too about like-minded community. I think it's really important to be around people too who don't have as much of a fixed mindset as well, because it's really easy, I find, to get sucked into that if you're around
Mhm.
people who do a lot compared to others who are more open-minded or more growth-minded. So, really,
Yeah.
yeah, especially if you're a newer grad too. Um, yeah, just being open to that growth and people who are growing in that direction as well, I think is super important. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate you being here. You've been wonderful. But can you tell us where people can connect with you, Shoni?
Yeah, totally. So the best place to, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
This has been really, really fun.
I wish we had more
And
time, truthfully. I don't mean to cut you off.
I I know, me too. I guess the best way to connect me would be on Instagram. So at 12 inches away, and it's spelled out in letters. So it's TWELBE, inches away. And if you're not on Instagram, I'm also on Facebook, or I have my website, 12inchesaway.com. And actually, yeah, so I work with one-on-one clients, but I've just opened up registration for a group coaching program helping women overcome perfectionism. So the program's starting on November 30th, and there is a limited time bonus for anyone who signs up by this Saturday night. So yeah.
Yeah, people should definitely check that out because you're wonderful and you're very authentic. And I think, like you said, you've had to have gone through it in order to make that now your message and means of helping others. So I really appreciate you getting into the healing space in this way from the
Thank
marketing
you.
space. It's been great having you. So I
Yeah.
will actually put your contact in the show notes too, just so you know, so that
Aw, thank you.
can reach out to you as well more directly. So I appreciate
Okay.
you. Thank you so
Sounds,
much for being here.
yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome. Okay. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
So if you guys like this podcast, please subscribe and leave an honest review. Your feedback means everything to me. Your reviews are what moves this podcast forward, and I always appreciate receiving them. If you want to get a hold of me directly, reach out to me on social media. My handles are in the show notes, and you can always subscribe to my weekly newsletters at jennifergeorge.co so that we can stay connected. So until next time, thank you guys so much again for your ongoing support.